I think I'm entitled. You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Put the kids to bed. Turn down the lights. Close the door. Now, buckle in and open your mind for the Roundtable Podcast with your hosts, Shogun and Rhodesian.
You're listening to the Roundtable Podcast. Join us on Discord for more discussions like these, with a warm family vibe and moderated environment.
Thank you, Wolven Rain, for that excellent voice-acted introduction, which we'll be using a lot in the future. We appreciate that. I am Shogun, and with me today we have the usual suspects. This is going to be a freestyle format podcast, which means anybody can bring up any topic they want, and we will just discuss freely as we usually do in the server. This will be recorded as content where you will be able to find it on Podcast Addict, Podcast Bean, YouTube, and check us out also on all social media and, of course, on the Discord server and our website. So that being said, rather than introduce a topic myself, I'm just going to open the floor. Is there anything anyone wants to bring to the table? We do have a new member here, name of Generalissimo, who has an interesting background in the military and Freemasonry, so he might be a bone to pick, so to speak. We also have Hank Hill, one of our resident cosmological skeptics, who always has some interesting ideas. We have NSA, who I know has been wanting to talk about some issues related to internet psyops, and anyone else who wants to bring anything up, please be my guest.
I just want to say hi to my handlers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Intelligence 25th and Fort Meade. How you guys doing tonight? Hope everything's going good.
Hello, and thank you to all our intelligence handlers that we may or may not have, any government or service people that may or may not be listening. We appreciate your service, or maybe we don't. That's up to each individual person to decide.
Yeah, it's the dialectic you choose, sir. Whatever you want, whatever you want to be to your neighbors in the great nation of.
So, how about we'll start with Generalissimo? Would you be interested in doing a little bit of an AMA to get us rolling?
Yeah, of course.
So AMA, of course, being Ask Me Anything. Generalissimo did send me documentation more or less verifying that he is indeed a military service member and he is indeed a third-degree Master Mason. I can more or less confirm this as verified. So I believe you mentioned that you are a tank or armored division commander, was it? Or just armored division tank operator?
The second thing. Just a tank commander. It's just the position on the tank. It's the individual in charge of that particular tank.
Okay, great. Well, we were originally going to do an episode focused around Sir Prize and his current and past service with the Navy. However, this is just as good or better. So would you be willing to tell us just about, I don't know, your experiences in the military, what it's like operating a tank, where your story starts, anywhere you think would be a good access point to this?
I guess we could start where the story starts. I mean, someone had mentioned the French Foreign Legion maybe an hour ago. I don't remember who it was. Someone had said something about that, and that's really where it started. I know it's not related to the U.S. military, but so I went to a military school when I was younger. I dropped out of high school in 7th grade. It wasn't really for me, but when I eventually decided to go back, I went to a military academy, and basically I got forced into getting a credential that the U.S. military wasn't taking at the time for enlistment. And being the history buff that I am, I knew about the French Foreign Legion and decided that, maybe I should go over there and maybe I'll get what I'm looking for overseas since I can't get it, in my home country. So I ended up going over there, and I was there for a couple weeks, didn't follow through with that for personal reasons, decided to come back and join the United States military whenever they actually were accepting the credential that I had. And in my mind, I was going to go back overseas to France after I finished my first enlistment, but things changed and I didn't do that. And I decided that I liked my job that I have over here because, to be perfectly honest, tanks are pretty cool. About as cool as you'd expect. But I mean, as far as like day-to-day, I guess, operations of a armored battalion, if you will, or a company. I mean, we do motor pool Mondays. Everybody's probably heard the term motor pool Monday. We go out there and we do maintenance, work on our tanks. If something's wrong with your tank, you fix it. You work with the mechanics to get it fixed. You really don't do much in the way of something interesting until you go to the field, or you leave, garrison or the cantonment area and go out and on operations and training rotations and things of that nature. That's when it really gets interesting. But so at this point, I mean, if there's anything anybody wants to know in particular, whether about that or about Freemasonry, because that runs pretty much right alongside my military.
Well, why don't we get more into the military aspect for a little while? Maybe we'll do like half the AMA about military, and then we'll switch over to half on masonry. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So what kind of tank did you operate or assist in operation of?
So what we use right now is the M1A2s. Some brigades in the active duty military still use M1A1s, which is the version, that was out before the M1A2s. They're all analog. There's, buttons, pulleys, levers, things of that nature. Not as many computers. Some of the brigades that don't have as much money or were older have those because that's just what they had, at the time. And then the newer brigades generally will get the new stuff. There's actually a brigade near me now that's going to get the M1A3, which is even more technologically advanced than what we currently have. But I've been on M1A2 Set V2s the entire time so far.
Okay. And how would you rate that tank in the hierarchy of tank quality, power, etc.? Is it one of the better tanks? Is it a larger tank, a smaller tank? Is it what is it? What can you tell us about it in regards to other tanks?
It's a pretty big beast. As far as like comparing it to other tanks, I mean, I think I think the M1 Abrams is a third or fourth generation. No, actually, I think the Russian.
I'm sorry, Generalissimo. I'm not sure if you're walking or if your mic is rubbing against something, but there's some kind of distortion coming. I can hear you clearly, but there's also some kind of distortion.
Is that better?
So far, so good. Thank you. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Sorry about that. The tank that we use, I think they started production of the M1 in like the late 70s, early 80s, and we've been using it since then. It is the only true battle-proven tank on the battlefield. So really, no matter what anybody says, our adversaries, whether they be, east, west, north, south, any talk they have about their technology doesn't really matter per se because it hasn't been proven.
I see. So,
in my opinion.
Okay. So you joined the military, you received training in operating a tank, and then you were deployed in tank somewhere?
Yes, it wasn't a combat deployment. It was a training rotation. We just went to Europe, Germany and Poland, and our mission there was basically more or less deterrence. It was to deter aggression from any potential aggressors at that time.
I'm sorry, where did you say you were deployed to?
Germany and Poland.
I see. And who would have been the potential aggressors in those regions?
Mainly Russia.
I see. So how do you assess the threat of a Russian incursion at the current time or when you were there? Is that something you think is likely? Was it likely then?
I honestly don't think so. I mean, I don't think that it ever would have escalated to that point. I mean, deployment is a pretty strong word thrown around these days. So they're more or less training rotations. I mean, we go over there to train, but the purpose is also a little bit of saber rattling. Like, we want, the Russians or whoever else to see that we're there and that we're supporting, our allied nations, and that if they were to do something that we could get there in whatever amount of time and build up combat power in whatever amount of time and be ready to fight them, notionally in whatever amount of time. But as far as whether or not I actually ever thought something was going to happen while we were there, no, I didn't ever think anything was going to happen.
I see. So I'm assuming in Germany, obviously, you would never have come under any active fire or experienced any kind of quote unquote combat. Is that correct? I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but I'll still ask.
I mean, unless you count drunken brawls, no.
Right. So what's the life like in a tank? I heard that the new Russian, I think it's called the T1, which is considered arguably the best tank, as far as I've heard, is at least the first Russian tank to have an onboard toilet, which apparently is quite luxurious, and they used to shit in ammo cans. Did you have a toilet on board your tank?
So I've never actually heard of a toilet on a tank. I think I heard that the British, I think they have like tea kettles in their tanks. I'm not sure if that's true. I've been inside of German tanks and I've been inside of French tanks. Those German tanks were owned by the Polish. They use retired Leopard 1s and 2s. And as far as life inside, yeah, we did. I've had to use the bathroom inside of an ammo can. Mainly what people will do is there's a stowage box right next to the tank commander station, and a popular option to go to the bathroom if you're in the middle of operations or training or whatever you're doing and you can't get out of the tank and go somewhere more comfortable like a stump or, a rock, is to take a trash bag and put it over that stowage box and just cheek the seat and tell everybody to plug their nose.
I see.
We do have camp stools that are supplied to us, which is basically a stool with a net, kind of looks like a basketball hoop, and we're supplied with these things called wag bags. And basically what it is you take this little bag, it's probably about the size of a sandwich bag, and it's got a bigger bag in it that has this, it's almost like cat litter. It just has really absorbent qualities, and you take that larger bag and you put it, in the seat, and you put it under the seat so that way it'll hold it up and it won't, drop down whenever you make landfall there. And then you tie that off and put it in the smaller bag. And what a lot of people like to do is just throw them out of their tanks into ditches and stuff, but we're not allowed to do that. So normally, someone is supposed to come and pick it up with a biohazard truck. I've never actually seen it happen. More often than not, I just dig a hole.
Interesting. So how many crew members were on your tank?
So if you have a full tank crew and you're not missing anybody, you'll have 4. You'll have the driver, you'll have the loader, and you'll have the gunner, and then the tank commander. And
interesting.
Yeah.
And what was your role again?
So at that time, I was a gunner, but now it's TC or tank commander.
Interesting. So, what else do I have to ask you about? How difficult is the social aspect? Do you guys get? Is it too cramped in there? Do you have conflicts with the other crew? Is the morale good or bad?
It really depends. I mean, there's seriously that saying that's been going on for however long, that embrace the suck mentality, that really comes into play. They try to keep like personalities together when it comes to tank crews, because if a crew doesn't jive, they're going to get themselves killed. They're going to get the other tank in their section killed. If they don't get along, there's going to be serious issues. And I mean, the reason that is when you're on a tank, if you don't trust these people to your left and right or below you, in terms of the TC, because a gunner sits right between his legs, basically, you're going to be in serious trouble, because when it comes to the stress and the intensity of operations, even if you're just training, because, we're supposed to train as we fight, and we go out there and do gunnery and simulator time and things like that. There really isn't any rank on a tank, they say. Ain't no rank on a tank. And if you don't respect the person behind you or in front of you or wherever, you're not really going to be worried about his well-being. And if you're not worried about his well-being, he's not going to be worried about yours. And if nobody cares about what happens to anybody else on the tank, nobody's going to be doing their job the best that they possibly can. And that's when things will start to go wrong. If the loader's not paying attention You know, you got the tank commander is usually on the radio, or he's like looking at his map, trying to figure out which way they're supposed to go or wherever, what route they should take. Loader at that point is supposed to be up out of the tank, popping out of his hatch, really giving directions to the driver. But if the loader doesn't care, then, you know, he's just going to sit there down there on his seat and not really do anything, which is why I take my loader seats out of my tanks, or I put them up with a bungee cord so they can't sit down on them, because I don't think you should ever be seated on a tank unless your station actually demands it, which would be the gunner station and the driver station.
I see. So could you tell us just maybe one or two of the most memorable things that happened while you were in a tank crew?
I remember we were out doing a CALFAX, which is just it's just a field training exercise, and this is a little bit lewd, but when you are on a tank and you have to pee, you have two options. You can either go into the sub turret, which I don't recommend because you'll have to clean that out afterwards, or you can go into a bottle. Either way, you're whipping it out. And I remember I wasn't on this tank, but it was over the net. And the way it was described to me, third party, was the driver crawled out of the driver's hole into the turret. And when he got up, the loader had his junk out. And the dude looks right at him from below and just goes, "Bro, is that your..." I'm sorry. Can I say?
You can swear, just no slurs, please.
He goes, "Bro, is that your dick?" And everybody hears it on the local net, so the entire platoon is just cracking up, like yelling on the radio, going, "What? What are you talking about?" Blah blah blah. And the dude wakes up from his like little, tired state and grabs it and shoves it back in really quickly and gets it caught on the zipper of his coveralls. So he's screaming. It's just hilarious. Like, you can't make stuff like that up. And then there was another time, and this happens a lot. I mean, most tankers or people who are just on combat vehicles have a story like this. Is when you're out, you're out there, and someone's going to the bathroom, but they actually have time, so they can get off the vehicle or out of the truck or whatever, wherever they are, and go sit down, in the bushes somewhere. But the thing is there's really no privacy when you do that, because we all have, night vision. We've got thermal vision. We've got optics, things of that nature. So a fun game would be to find people who were, taking a dump in the woods and tell everybody where they were, and everybody would orient, their sights over there and watch them and just joke about them until they got back to their tank, and then everybody would give them, just give them shit about it. Or another thing we would do is try to be the first person to find certain animals doing it in the middle of the night. Like if you could find rabbits, it was however many points. Hogs, however many points. Deer, however many points. You'd be surprised how much of the wildlife is giving it to each other when the sun goes down.
Right. Interesting. So maybe, is there anything else you want to say or share about military, just based on your experience? And then maybe ask you one more question, and then we'll move on to the masonry issue.
Unless anybody has something specific to ask, I mean...
I do have a specific question. It would just be based on your military knowledge and experience as an insider or former insider, so to speak. How do you assess the current military and geopolitical situation in terms of, are we likely to see any kind of hot war? What are the big military threats? Who are potential enemies? How likely is World War III? How likely is a war in Iran? Anything along these kind of lines? Like where do you see things going militarily in the next, 10 years?
So unfortunately, I don't get paid to think like that at my pay grade, but the people who do get paid to think that way regularly tell us that if we think that we're not going to see combat in the next 5 to 10 years, we are all stupid.
Okay, and who would you suggest would be the most likely nations or threats that American servicemen might expect to see combat against or with?
I would probably just say the Russians.
Well, this is of great interest. So, can you tell us anything about what you think the situation is with regards to Russia? How tense is it? What are the sources or theaters of conflict that we might expect to see engage?
As far as sources of conflict, I would say that I don't know if they would really. I don't know if they would really react to all this. I don't know if everybody's been watching the news. It's been, it's happened for however long ago. All this business with the United States and Iran. Everybody was worried that if something did escalate, that Russia would, come to Iran's aid. But I really didn't at any point think that they really would. The only reason I even say Russia is just because that's what they hammer into us. Because, like I said, I mean, we don't really get paid to think that much. They just tell us, "Hey, this is your enemy. This is what you're going to do. Don't ask questions."
I see. So, do you have any thoughts about how good Surprise has joined us? Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Surprise.
Thank you. I beg you of your pardon.
Not a problem. These things happen. No worries. So this is then a question for both Surprise, who is serving in the Navy, and Mr. Generalissimo, who is an American former tank operator or operator. This is either or both of you. What would you imagine would be the scenario? I mean, how can we imagine an actual war with Russia? I mean, we know Russia is the second most powerful country in the world geopolitically, the second most powerful in the world militarily, and the third most powerful in the world economically. So if Russia were to, for example, try to annex Belarus and people were to try and decide this was a red line, or if there was to be some kind of invasion of, I think it's Iceland that they worry about might be invaded as it has no military. It's actually a really good show about this. Can't remember what it's called. So what would this look like, right? And we know NATO was intended to prevent this. We know that NATO has been weakened. We know Russia is looking to be on the rise, so to speak. And America seems to be occupying itself elsewhere with regards to Iran, et cetera. So let's say Putin decided to make a bold move. What would this look like? Can we get any general ideas about
that? And originally it would be, it all goes without saying that any action would be under the dark and heavy cloud of a nuclear phenomenon, but we just take that out of the picture. Originally, you would see huge Russian gains. I think the Baltic states would be fucked immediately. Western Ukraine be difficult, but not. It wouldn't be easy, but it wouldn't be long for Russia to take that over. Belarus is an ally, cultural partner. I don't think annexation for them would be very hard. In fact, they actually had a bill where they were working on designs to unify. It didn't go anywhere, but the fact that that was even imaginable tells how close those two countries are. I think that's where they would stop. I don't see a Russian invasion into Poland or any sort of overreach. I don't think they have the capacity, really, and they know that. That would be so just be a reconquest of their former Western Soviet borders and waiting for the United States and the Europeans to build up sufficient force to throw them back into their original, status quo ante positions. But of course, that would take quite a while. We actually don't have that many troops in Europe. A lot of our troops, a lot of our presence, they're tripwire troops, which means we're assuming we're going to put just enough there that you kill any, that will be coming eventually. That'd be a bad idea for you. But there's not, 50,000 Americans camped out, Poland, for instance. So you'd see huge Russian gains initially, I would think, unless they managed to just fuck up in a major way. Originally, it would not end well for them just because people are fond of saying, "Oh, their economy is the size of California," but just the massive weight of Western material and resources eventually drive. But overall, it'd be a bloody affair. And then once they're thrown back, does the West have the intelligence to just make it status quo, to come to some sort of agreement, or will we try to push on to Moscow and trigger some sort of nuclear? It's hazy and hellish after that. That's how I would see it going.
Do you imagine that a third party, possibly another superpower, obviously in this regard we would mean China, get involved? I mean, we've certainly seen an unmistakable trend towards, I guess I keep wanting to say Sino-Soviet, but I guess you'd say Sino-Russian alliance culturally, economically, politically, diplomatically, and militarily. We've seen like an enormous strengthening of ties between China and Russia. Do you think China would stay out of such a conflict, or would it become a World War III of sorts by two superpowers perhaps unifying against America? Or how do you think China would wait this one out, or not?
I think that would be Christmas times a million for China. I think they would support the Russians. They would try to make the war last as long as possible. They would use leverage to gain, or they would use the war to gain, and their support for Russia to gain more leverage in the Far East, which they have a huge amount of interest in. The Russian Far East, I should say, Siberia and the like. Because Russia and China are really forced together by U.S. policy. I think Russia and Putin's actions have proven this, would much prefer to be at least tentatively aligned with the West, not allies maybe, but friendly, or an independent third position, because they know that if they align with China, they are a Jew. There's some cultural issues there. There's a history of, like you mentioned, the Sino-Soviet split. These two are not natural allies. I think a war between Russia and the West would make that abundantly clear. I think they would take more the view that Stalin took when Hitler invaded Western Europe. It's like a pox on both houses. Let's see how this goes and try to benefit maximum from it. The U.S. is distracted in Europe. Let's go pedal to the metal in the South China Sea with their string of pearls throughout the Indian Ocean. I don't think China would send a single, to paraphrase Bismarck, I don't think the bones of a single Chinese grenadier would be wasted from their perspective on a West versus Russia conflict. You'd see some support for Russia, but overall they would just be giddy with how that turns out.
Fascinating. Now, how significant is the vast naval disparity between Russia and America? So we know America has a large, the world's largest aircraft carrier fleet. I'm not sure exactly how many they have, but it's quite a few. Russia has only one, which is called like the Admiral Gorkov or something, and it shoots huge plumes of dirty black smoke into the air, and it recently caught in fire, and a third of it burned or something. So they have one partially burned, kind of outdated aircraft carrier against a number of modern carriers and super carriers. So how would this play into it? How would America's superiority in terms of aircraft carriers alter this potential conflict, and how would Russia circumvent this? Because I've always understood aircraft carriers, along with, of course, like the B-2 bomber, the F-35, et cetera, is sort of one of the dominant weapons of war. So how would Russia get around this, and how would these aircraft carriers play into this conflict or not? If you can comment on that.
That's the funny thing about Russia. They're one of the few states that's sort of pervious to naval power. This was something that vexed the British, because Britain and Russia were actually intense rivals. I would encourage everyone to look into, if you aren't already aware of the Great Game, where for a long time after the defeat of Napoleon, Britain saw Russia as its primary threat, especially to India. And that's because it's very hard to deal with. They've got Arctic seas to the north of it. I mean, we abut each other on Bering Straits with Alaska and Siberia, but there's nothing of great strategic importance there. There's no major cities. There's not a whole lot of resources. What are you going to do, really? You can't. It's no place you would focus 25 American divisions. That's for sure, especially when all that shit would be going to Europe that would need your attention. And then on its western flank, one warm weather port? Of course, there's plenty of bottlenecks thanks to the Scandinavian Peninsula. You can't just sail into the Baltic Sea. Lots of choke points, and of course, all of this is underlined, or what I'm alluding to, is the fact that it spans Eurasia. It's a massive country, so I don't see a naval conflict really, and that's part of why Russia's never had to be a major naval power. I mean, they have been at times. The Soviet Union had a pretty powerful navy, of course, match anything close to what we have. Our navy, as large as it is now, is tiny compared to what it was in the Cold War, and that was tiny compared to what it was in World War II. I think we had like 10,000 ships. So, not to say that the naval element wouldn't be important, but any war with Russia is going to have to be done in the air and on ground. You're not going to choke Russia. Russia's just too big, and its geography means that you're not going to be able to make too much head. You can bottle them up in the Baltic. Maybe you can get Turkey on your side, bottle them up in the Black Sea, but they have the defensive capabilities that you're not just sailing into St. Petersburg. I mean, you can try. We probably would, and it would be extremely difficult. You're not just sailing into Sebastopol, and why would you go into their Far Eastern regions? Because then you might actually get a Chinese response, and that's a huge pain in the ass. It'd be a bit of a MacArthur goes too far in Korea situation. So yeah, I wouldn't see the Navy other than maybe as like an air platform, and of course doing what the Navy could do. But I think that would be primarily a ground. If we ever did go to war with Russia, we couldn't do much from the sea.
Okay, excellent analysis. Thank you. So that raises an obvious next question. What about air combat? How important would air combat be? How capable, and I know that naval is obviously your specialty, but how capable would Russia's Air Force be in challenging America's? We know the F-22 has been virtually, well, actually literally unparalleled and almost invincible to the point that like one F-22 can basically kind of clear the skies of enemy aircraft because of how vastly superior they are. And of course, America now has the most expensive weapon system of all time in the F-35, something like a $1.5 trillion weapons platform. However, we also know that Russia has created the Su-57 or Sukhoi 57, which by all accounts can rival or perhaps even exceed, but certainly perhaps rival the F-22 and F-35. We also know they don't have enough of them and cannot afford enough of them yet, but they do have some. So how do you see the aerial combat going? If the naval combat is not going to be important, how important would air forces be?
Oh, it'd be incredibly important. And I think we have an edge there. And exactly because of what you just said, the PAC-5 or the Sukhoi 57, excellent aircraft, but they've had huge problems with acquisition. But, there's more to it than just that, because not all of our planes are F-35s, not all of our planes are F-22s. So then you get down into, I can't remember all of our systems, the F-18s, the F-15s, F-15Es. And I certainly don't remember all of theirs, but when you get to that fourth generation level, they're every bit as good as we are. I mean, they are the second air power in the world. They've had decades of experience. And I think they're still well ahead of the Chinese. The Chinese steal as much from them as they do from us because of that. When it comes to industrial espionage, so it'd be hugely important. I would say that we have an edge, but the edge is a lot less, and the edge would be a lot poorer. So, I mean, when it comes to air defense systems, missiles, that kind of thing, it would be interesting to see. I think it would become a battle of attrition at that point.
Fascinating.
Who can keep the most planes up in the air as opposed to who can having in an air war with Russia, having 20 of the world's best planes, because of course stealth is kind of a misnomer. It's kind of like calling a suppressor a silencer. It doesn't silence the gun; it just quiets it quite a bit. Same with stealth; it's actually low observability, so you can see a stealth aircraft. It's very, very difficult, but if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be the Russians. So you would want as many. Like I said, I think that would be attrition at that point. And having 20 of the world's best aircraft would be a lot less important than having 250 aircraft that are very good that you can easily reproduce, because you're going to lose quite a few. And that's
Right. So before we move on from the aerial combat aspect, we have talked about fighters, the Su-57 versus the F-22 and F-35, and of course the fourth generations, the MiGs or whatever, and the Tomcats or whatever they may be. But there's also such a thing as stealth bombers. We know the most deadly weapon system is basically the B-2 Spirit bomber. We also know Russia is now developing the PackDa fifth generation stealth bomber. So assuming that they either have something like this already, or that those are operational by the time this conflict happens, where do you see the significance of stealth bombers being in this war on both sides?
given their size and any great power car. I mean, you can use them, and we have used them for other things, but unless we're going to, again, start producing a whole lot more, those are pretty much, it's one thing to send a B-2 over Kandahar to vaporize a certain compound that you think a high-level person is in, but you wouldn't just send a B-2 over to, like, blow up the Kremlin. You wouldn't take that risk. So unless, and same with theirs, unless production of these became a lot greater to make strategic bombing actually viable, I really don't see these as anything more than nuclear platforms. So I'm not sure how much they would be used to be.
All right, and last point on aerial military technology, we now have not only manned stealth bombers like the PackDa, which is believed to be manned or semi-manned, and the B-2, which is manned. There's also such a thing as unmanned aerial drones. Russia has one. It looks like a stealth bomber, but it's a robot, an AI. And America is obviously developing these as well, as is China. Does this change the equation significantly? I mean, the only difference I'm aware of between an unmanned stealth bomber and a manned stealth bomber is that an unmanned stealth bomber can stay in the air for weeks at a time because the pilot does not need to sleep, eat, shit, or piss. But are there other strategic significances to these unmanned aerial vehicles?
Cheaper, more plentiful, easier to replace. And you're not losing pilots in the process. They're not exactly independent enough to, how should I put? I mean, you're not dogfighting, but yeah, they would play a huge role, because why would you send in an F-22 if you can to strike at, I don't know, some headquarters outside of Astrakhan, for example, just someplace deep in Russia? When you can send a stealth, a stealth drone, and not even stealth drones, I mean, just drones in general, huge impact in that war. That's one thing where it's not like the bombers, because there is so many of them. They are so cheap. They are so much more easy that you would see those used extensively, and probably the majority of the time. Perfectly honest. And that I'm not aerial warfare expert by any means, but I could not see us not just hurling drones at them and them doing the same to us.
All right. So I guess since we've covered naval and aerial combat, we may as well discuss the infantry and tank warfare aspect. My understanding is that Russia now has the best two tanks in the world. I think one is called the T1 and the other one's like the T4 or T34. I'm not sure. But it's the Armada, they call it, and it's supposed to be the best tank in the world. Generalissimo may also be able to weigh in on this. Yes. So how does the tank warfare play out, and we'll start with the tank warfare, the armored warfare.
I yield to him on this.
Are you still there, Generalissimo? Do you want to speak at all on Russian tanks
Yeah,
versus American
sorry about
tanks?
that. I was in that chat talking to someone.
No
I'll
problem.
switch gears here.
So just to reiterate the question, we've been going over how a war between Russia and America might play out. We've talked about the naval aspect and the aerial aspect, so now we're just going to do this thoroughly because I find it interesting. How would the armored warfare between Russia and America play out? Is it true that the T1 and T4 Armada tanks are the best tanks in the world? I may have mistaken the names. I think it's the T1 and T4 Armadas. I've heard they're the best tanks in the world. They're stealth tanks. They have an onboard toilet. They're all that.
So they may be the best tanks in the world on paper. I don't know. I haven't looked over them. I haven't really looked at them. The only thing I remember of the T-14 Armada was whenever they had a military parade several years ago and they were first showcasing it. It stalled out on the airfield that they were having the parade. I thought that was kind of funny. I think it was the driver's fault, though, so I don't think it was a technological failure. But as far as their claims, I mean, they very well might be true on paper. I'm sure they have some technology that we don't have, but I'm sure we have some technology that they don't know about too, given the M1A3s are about to come out. I'm actually share a post with the brigade that is going to get one of the first batches. The difference between the M1A3 and whatever the Russians have, the T-14s, and what was the other one you said?
Well, I think one's called the T1. I'm not sure, T-34 or T4. I know they call it the Armada, and I know it has been called the best tank in the world, but I don't know if that's 100% accurate or not.
So our platform, our tanks, the Abrams tanks, they have been combat tested and they've been combat proven. We know that we can operate with these tanks. We know that these tanks work. We know they're reliable. We know that we know how to fix them. We know everything about them. We know what they're capable of. We know what they're not capable of. In addition to that, we know what papers and what scientists and engineers say they're capable of. And we know, as tankers, what the tanks are capable of. What Russian tankers don't know is that same thing. They know what their commanders are telling them. They know what the scientists and engineers are telling them. They know what their, higher echelons are telling them. They know that. But they have not actually been in combat on these tanks. They don't even know if the toilet will flush, while the turret is on, I mean, it's little things like that. There's no way that they can know how capable the tank actually is since it hasn't proven its capabilities. I mean, as far as, I don't know if they've gone out and done any gunneries or whatever they might call them. That's just when it's like going to a rifle range, but you're, in a tank instead of holding an M4. But again, even that is far different than going on operations and training rotations, actually pushing the tank to its limits, going into terrain that maybe the tank shouldn't go into, fighting the track, greasing hubs, replacing end connectors that fall off so you don't pop track in the middle of a mountain and, and run out of water. Seen that happen before. There's no possible way for them to accurately make that claim, I think, until after any dust that may be stirred up settles. And again, about our tank, or the one we use, that could be said the same about the M1A3. People could say, oh, well, the M1A3, it's a new tank. How do you know, how can you stop someone from making the same claims against that tank? Well, here's the thing, is it's still the same tank. It's just upgraded. It's got fiber optic cables, it's a couple tons lighter, it's got stronger armor, it's got better technology. Still doesn't have an auto loader, which everybody is obsessed about automatic loading, and it's not the way to go. As long as our loaders are trained to this standard, which is being able to load a Sabo in 7 seconds or less, and a heat round, or MPAT, because we're switching to MPAT, in under 5 seconds, we will always be able to beat in terms of reloading and throwing rounds down range, we will always be able to throw rounds down range and at Russians or whoever else faster, because their loaders, their auto loaders, cannot compete with good old elbow grease. They truly can't, at least not right now. So I would say it would be my, I would bet money that if you put a T-14 Armada and, you know, an M1A2 or even an A1 together in a field, and you put them about 1,000 meters apart, and, you know, maybe you had like an old, you know, cowboy western, like, you know, they turn around and draw or whatever, take 10 paces and turn and fire. That M1 would win every time, especially if they weren't battle carrying whatever ammunition they were going to use. Because again, that circles back to that loader. I'm telling you, I have seen men load 120 millimeter round in like 2.1 seconds. I've timed it because it's a part of our training that we have to do before we go out to do even more training. And those auto loaders aren't that fast. And the other thing is I can tell you right now, your average Russian soldier, if that autoloader goes down, they're not going to know how to fix it. They're not going to know what to do. And then what do they do at that point? Like I said, I haven't looked inside the tank. I don't know if there's some sort of, maybe they can disable the autoloader and, you know, throw rounds into the tube manually. I don't know. Maybe they have that capability. But that couple of seconds that it takes, if they were able to do that, to, you know, probably disconnect whatever they have to disconnect and, you know, get their bearings and figure everything out, in that couple of seconds, they've already been destroyed.
I see. Very interesting. So how about, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm on your content, so you tell me. Well, I'll ask questions when you're finished.
I was just going to say, I also don't know the extent of their armored doctrine. I know that ours was recently updated. I don't know how up to date theirs is. I know, you know, the Russians historically, you know, have been pretty strong with their armor, but I mean, ours was just the headquarters in the Department of the Army. You know, they just updated. I got a copy of Tank Platoon right here, which, I mean, it tells you everything you could possibly know. And this is another thing now when we get to individual soldiers, which is not so much armor as it is just Russian morale. But I know that their soldiers aren't as happy to be there as ours are. And I know I talked about that earlier. This last couple of generations of soldiers is probably going to do more bad than they do good. But I still think that they're leaps and bounds ahead of your typical Russian soldier who, you know, probably doesn't know his ass from the hole in the ground. They have us learn these things from the get-go. As soon as you get out of your job training and your basic training or boot camp or whatever you want to call it, our privates are, we try to, as long as they're, you know, not, you know, terrible excuses for human beings, they typically operate a couple of pay grades above them. We've got privates that can do what I do if I were to die. Everybody is trained to do the job above them. So in theory, if the TC or the tank commander were to die, the gunner, all he would have to do, and they said this might be a PFC because I've seen PFC, private first class gunners, all he might have to do is just grab that handle, like move his body out of the way, slide into the TC seat, and take command of that tank. And then all that loader's going to do is continue to throw rounds. All that driver's going to do is continue to drive. And I don't think, like I said, I'm a little biased, but I don't think that I don't imagine that the Russian soldiers and Russian tankers are trained to that same level. I feel like they're probably trained to do their specific position, and that's it. And I feel like if that same scenario were to play out on a Russian tank, they would probably be so busy trying to figure out what to do that, again, they would be acquired. They would get a good laze from an American tank, whatever, 1,200 meters. TC would give that firing command, and they'd be blown to smithereens.
So how about in terms of sheer numbers? Like, how many tanks does Russia have versus America? And then we'll move on to maybe the next topic after that. Oh, there's also a question I want to ask after this, but what about numerically?
So numerically, I don't know an exact number, and even if I did, I probably couldn't give it out. But numbers aside, I still can confidently say that even if we were going up against let's say we had a platoon of tanks, American tanks, and they were going up against a company-sized element. So we'll say a platoon has about 4 tanks, and they're divided into sections. You have Alpha section and Bravo section, and you've got generally 3 platoons in an armored company. So we'll say that we've got 4 tanks going up against 12 tanks. If you want to include their command tanks, we'll say 14 tanks. So we've got 4 tanks going against 14 tanks. If that section of American tankers is trained to standard, and they know what they're doing, and they are following their armored doctrine, and they have ammo, they have fuel, and everybody knows what to do and when to do it, I would venture to say that they would probably destroy that company-sized element. So I don't think numbers really even particularly matters. It really just comes down to training. And I think that we're better trained.
Fascinating. So thank you for that great breakdown. Because we've now covered naval, aerial, and armored combat, it would trigger my OCD if we did not also at least briefly talk about infantry and special forces. So question for both Surprise and Generalissimo. How did the American infantry units compare with the Russian? And same question vis-a-vis Spetsnaz versus, the various special forces branches of the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and the Green Berets, etc.
I think on average, there is no comparison, just exactly because of what Generalissimo was talking about. I mean, the professional Russian soldier is as good as any, not as well equipped as we are, but I mean, you take someone who's been through Fort Benning, is putting in 4 years, versus some conscript who's like 19 doing his mandatory 2. I don't see a huge, in terms of just the average quality of the average. So now, of course, when we get into elite, of course, a little bit different. Maybe the tip of each spear is just as sharp, but what's behind it, America hasn't. Not that Russia couldn't get to a point where that's not the case. They've shown themselves to be very, very adept at war. That's why, despite their position, they're still considered the world's second power, ahead of Russia, or China rather. But I mean, just as it stands right here, right now, if that happened tomorrow, what happens? The average American soldier is going to not have a cakewalk by any means, but clear edge to that's my understanding.
In terms of I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of, hang on one second.
Well, he's doing whatever he needs to do, and that's you've been comments Surprise about regular infantry. Would you like to make any comparison between the KGB, who I understand, or not KGB, I'm talking about the Spetsnaz, who are, as I understand it, quite feared and respected as special forces operators. So is there any particular significance to the Spetsnaz and how they may or may not stack up to Western special forces or American special forces?
Not as well resourced. I would have to say I don't know. I don't know if, because of course Spetsnaz is a general special, and I'm not entirely sure of all the various makeup Spetsnaz. I feel like U.S. SOCOM. I don't think there's anything better The Russians could definitely do a lot of damage, but I just, when you look at just the tapestry, the constellation of special forces that we possess, the experience, I hate our involvement in the Middle East, but holy shit, just a playground for special operations. And that gets back into sort of what Generalissimo was saying about experience and training and knowing what you're capable of and what you're not. Little tricks of the trade that you wouldn't even find out in training. With regards to the tankers, I think the same thing applies to both our military in general, but definitely DevGru, the Green Berets, Air Force's 22nd Battalion. You just go down the list. It's night and day. It'd be a bit of a learning curve.
Can you comment on the concept of Delta Force? What they actually are?
That's the Green Berets, Delta Force. That's one of the armies. It's the Army component of U.S. SOCOM or U.S. Special Operations.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, General Smith. Were you being assistant General Smith?
Where were we at?
Just discussing American capacities versus Russian and American Special Forces capacities versus Russian. I know we're going to screen thought now, but I'm committed to this, but we're going to go up the end. Do you have anything to say about that?
You're roboting very bad, Shogun.
Okay, I'm glad that wasn't just me. Yeah, that was a pretty. I caught most of it, but you roboted a bit.
I was out boxing, but I had a lot to ask, but then I forgot that we were doing this because I'm like forces. Y'all got any of them there drone toys to play with? Actually, you would know.
I've got a story about those though.
Yeah.
So we were out in a training rotation, and I was still a driver at this point. I wasn't a gunner. I wasn't anything. I was a driver, and we have these. They call them OCs, and it stands for operator controller. It's the guys who come out whenever we're doing our fake wars with our laser equipment, and they kind of control what's going on. And if there's like a dispute to settle, like if someone's like, "Oh, I killed him," or "No, I killed him first," they do that. They handle that. They're kind of like the referee. But what they would do is they would fly drones, and not military grade drones, but just like your little drones you could get on Amazon, right? And they would tape glow sticks to them, and then they would fly around and they would find tanks whose hatches were open. And if your hatch was open, they would drop it down the hatch and say that it was a grenade and that you were dead. So I'll never forget this. I wasn't on this tank. I was in the section. And I see from far away, we're in our battle position, they're in their battle position. There's a sergeant, he's a gunner at the time. He's risen up through the ranks more, but at the time he was a gunner for that tank. And he was doing his personal hygiene in the morning. And, generally they don't bother you in the morning because, while we're training, still like, okay, well, we got to let these guys shave. Otherwise they're going to get screamed at when the sergeant major comes out here to see how everything's going. So he's out there shaving. And you start to hear this little noise just, getting closer and closer and closer, and then going away and getting closer and closer. And all of a sudden you see this little drone hover down through the trees and like stand by his tank. And I just hear, I hear him, he goes, "Oh, hell no." And he starts swinging his hygiene kit. It's this little bag, swinging it at the drone, and they're just messing with him with the drone, dropping it, bringing it back up, dropping it, bringing it back up. And then it tries to fly over the hatch to drop the, simulated grenade. And he goes, "Mama didn't raise no bitch." And he throws his hygiene kit at the drone and knocks it out of the sky. It took 30 seconds before the OC showed up. "What the fuck was that? What are you doing?" It was so funny.
Mama didn't raise no bitch. Have you seen any use of the anti-drone guns though? The ones that have the EMF that disrupt the signal for the drones? Because I mean, that's probably.
I haven't seen it personally, but I know we are being trained up on it because they brief us on that much. We get all the MOSs together and we do a road to war brief, they call it, and they'll talk to each company and say, this is what you're going to be doing, this is what you have, these are your capabilities, these are the standards, blah blah blah. So I know that they do train up on it consistently, but that's beyond my knowledge how they actually do it. Or
yeah, the French ones, they have one that looks really goofy, and it's God, what do they call it? It had some weird name like Excalibur on it. Anyway.
Am I still roboting, gentlemen?
No, you're fine now.
No, that's way better.
Sorry about that. Yeah, if my connection robots or if I don't speak, please just carry on without me, as my connection is not great right now. Okay. So this was a really good analysis of Russia versus America hypothetical war. We've covered naval, aerial, infantry, and tank combat. And again, I'm sorry if anyone finds this tedious. I certainly don't. Last thing to discuss would be nuclear weapons, hypersonic nuclear weapons, etc. And in particular, Putin now says he has the strategic advantage because he has the, what is it called? The Avangard hypersonic nuclear cruise missile, apparently operational, whereas America is apparently still working to get this operational, which would mean potentially, based on what I've seen, that a nuclear weapon could be fired by Russia that would go 34 times the speed of sound and be capable of bending around protective areas deployed by aircraft carriers and whatever kind of interception capacities they have. And potentially a nuclear first strike could be launched. So how important is this, and would this change this potential conflict in a significant way, do you guys think?
I don't think so. I think mutually assured will happen regardless. It's just a quicker strike. That's all. It's just more swinging dicks around. If you recall, a couple years ago, rather, when Mattis was in, he wanted to create tactical nukes, and the treaties for these things were going away, so they were going to develop tactical nukes. Now, a tactical nuke is the size of Little Man that we use in Japan. Like, that's a tactical nuke now. So they were trying to figure out, new technologies to do that kind of stuff because of the treaties that were going away. And I think 2021 we have another nuclear treaty that's going away for medium range. I think I can't recall right now. But yeah, I don't think it affects it mutually assured. We both have 6,000 warheads aimed at each other. I mean, we're still on fucking hair trigger right.
All right. Well, that was a really good breakdown of that. I know we did discuss talking about Freemasonry. However, I feel like after doing so much discussion of military topics, it might seem a little odd to switch to Masonry, and that really could be its own podcast. So I think I'd prefer to make Freemasonry its own podcast. Continue on the military theme today. So maybe there's two ways we could go. One, we talk to Generalissimo about his time in service. We could talk to Surprise in general terms about his service, past and current. Or we could just open the lines and see if anybody has any questions. Does anyone have a thought on that?
Yeah. You meet the aliens yet?
This is a fair question. Generalissimo or Surprise, have either of you ever seen UFOs? Have either of you ever been briefed on unidentified aerial phenomenon or unidentified aerial threats? What is the culture or level of discussion in the military about this? Is this a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing? Is this laughed at? Is this understood? I mean, we do know there's been naval releases of information saying there are UFOs. They acknowledge that they're real. They acknowledge they're not human. They acknowledge that they pose a grave threat to national security. A lot of this happened in 2019. So has this filtered down into your communities in the military?
Not in my experience.
I'll tell you right now that I don't know about the rest of the Army or the other branches, but the combat arms branch of the Army is very, very superstitious. I know that's not necessarily a word used when, describing extraterrestrials. I just say that because of what it made me think of was because this could be perceived or thought of to be many different things. When going on training rotations, a lot of people they do have their campfire stories, that they tell of the strange things that have happened, whether it was alien or supernatural. Maybe those two are one and the same. Who knows? You know, no one really does. They could be mistaken for each other. But I do remember one time when we were on a rotation to a training center in California, the National Training Center in California. That's at Fort Irwin. And we had just settled down for log pack and everything. They were bringing us our fuel. They bring us our fuel and our food. It was actually hot chow, which was nice because we hadn't had that in a couple of days. And a few of us were sitting over by, and this is probably more superstitious than it is extraterrestrial, but as I said, like, who knows? A few of us were sitting down by one of the trucks. It was a Humvee, column trucks, one of the gun trucks, sort of on the perimeter of where we were, you know, basing ourselves. And we were all just sitting around. The sun had just gone down. The headlights of the Humvee were on. We were using it, you know, so we could kind of see, and they were shining on us because, you know, obviously we're not going to, you know, make a fire. That's not allowed. So we were using the light from the headlights to just sit there and talk and eat. And we had this guy who was he was a Native American, pretty much full-blooded Native American. I believe he was Navajo. And I don't know if you know a lot about Navajo myth. And as I said, I know this isn't extraterrestrial, but this is just where my mind went. And again, you know, who knows? It could have been extra, like something trying to understand us nonetheless.
Well, they believe in star people, so yeah.
And shapeshifters. This person, a person approached us seemingly out of nowhere. They didn't come from the other vehicles. They didn't come from the center of the Alpha or the area of operations, whatever you want to call it. They came from nowhere is the only way I could really describe it. They were not here, and then they were here. And they sort of walked out of the darkness. And this guy, you couldn't really... I don't know if he had features at the time, but I can remember a face. I really can. And so could some of these people that we were with. And none of us can remember how he looks. We just know that he was about average height and he was in uniform, but he wasn't in the right uniform. We were all wearing our kit because we were away from our vehicles. So we had our body armor on. We had our name tapes on. We had our ACHs. That's the Advanced Combat Helmet. We had those on. Our boots. This guy walks up. He's just wearing the regular camouflaged uniform, you know, the utilities. He has no helmet or hat. He has nothing on his head. He has no boots or socks on. He has no name tapes, no rank, no patches on his shoulders. And his uniform is very, very, very clean. And he just comes up and beelines toward the Native American person, that Navajo person that I had mentioned, and starts talking to him and asking these really personal questions, like very, very, very personal questions. And I couldn't, like I said, I wasn't right up on there, so I don't know what he was actually asking him. But that is what was told to me, is he started asking really personal questions. And then I asked him, I was like, you know, what sort of stuff did he ask you? And he did not want to tell anybody what they talked about. And as quickly as that guy was there, he was gone. And no one ever saw him again. No one knows who he was. No one can remember what he looks like. Like I said, mind you, like I'm good with faces. We had a couple of the people there that were good with faces. And no one knows who he was.
Wow. What an amazing story. Glad we got that one out of the podcast. So that being said, I mean, we could speculate on what that was, but I think we all know we can't tell. Was it a ghost, a spirit, an alien in disguise, an angel, a demon? I mean, you take your guess.
It kind of reminds me of the Fort Bragg possession story they're trying to peddle out. You know, they're making a movie about it too. There's apparently a possession of Fort Bragg. Now, Fort Bragg, for those who don't know, is head of psychological operations training for these guys. Like, it's basically where they're training on these things. And then apparently there was a possession of Fort Bragg while in the midst of in the midst of training at some point, and they're making a movie out of it. But interesting enough.
very interesting as well, and we should definitely get into that story, and I'll research it. We can talk about it more, but before we do, I did want to ask, since that was such a good story, personal experience, is there either any more supernatural experiences that you've ever had, Generalissimo, in the field or outside of it? And or surprise, have you ever experienced anything of a supernatural nature in or outside of your line of work?
Unfortunately, I have not.
Surprise has dreams about me.
I do have another, not in the field. And this one, I tried to research. I couldn't really find much about. I don't remember the name of it. But what I eventually, well, no, I'll just tell the story first instead of saying what I thought it was, because then it won't be as creepy. So I was driving back from where I was based at. I was driving. It was a long weekend. I was driving home. And I would normally leave after work. I wouldn't wait until the following morning. So half of my drive would be in the pitch dark. And the majority of the drive was on a little 2-lane highway that wasn't really traveled that much. Not as much as, like an interstate or a state road or anyway. It was just this little 2-lane road. No trees or anything. Like, it was just flatlands for as far as you could see. Even if there were trees, you probably wouldn't be able to see them because they would be far back from the road and as dark as it was. But anyway, if I jump around a lot, I haven't told this story in a while, but it is true. I might jump around. I might go back and forth as I remember details. But people tend to like this one. So I'm driving, and I get to that 2-lane road, and I'm kind of just listening to music. I'm doing my thing, just driving, trying to stay awake. I'm starting to fade at this point. And I see this car all of a sudden. I didn't notice it before. I hadn't been thinking about it, but all of a sudden I just got this feeling that this car that was behind me, two things. One came out of nowhere, however long ago, because it did. All right, let me back up. Okay, so here it was. So I looked up and the car wasn't behind me. And here's the thing about this road is there's nowhere to turn on. Like, there's no driveways at this point. There's no on ramps, off ramps, whatever. Unless he was speeding, I mean, he could have come up on me, but I was going probably about 85 miles an hour. So he had to have been going 90 miles an hour to catch up to me. And there's no reason why somebody's going to go 90 miles an hour on a 2-lane road when it's pitch dark out, especially, a road that's frequently visited by deer, given, it being in the middle of nowhere. So I realized that he came out of nowhere, and then I kind of start keeping an eye on him. I'm like, okay, well, this guy, I don't know where he came from. He's been following me for a while. It's been 70 miles. And then I also start to think, I'm like, and this is in the back of my mind, and this will come into play later. I also start to think this road's shorter than that. I shouldn't have been on this road this long, but I kind of just put a pin in that. I'm like, I'm not going to freak myself out. I'm psyching myself out. Maybe I'm just going slower than I normally go. This car catches up to me, and he's riding me. And at this point, I slowed back down to probably about 70 miles an hour. And I realized that he's behind me, and his headlights are like this kind of green color, like this ghostly green color. And it's kind of strange. And I'm like, okay, this dude's following me. Maybe I cut him off or something. I don't know. Like I said, I was tired. So I was just thinking all sorts of things. Maybe I made him mad and he finally caught up to me or something. So I speed up, really to test if he's following me. And I got up again back to 90 miles an hour, and he's keeping the pace. He gets up to 90 with me, and he doesn't hesitate. He's just with me. And then I'm like, okay, this dude's following me. So I slow back down, and I'm thinking what to do. And as I'm thinking what to do, he goes into the oncoming traffic lane and catches up with me and starts riding side by side with me. And the only way I can describe this, and I swear this is what happened, is the window, the passenger side front window, starts to roll down, and this like ethereal, I guess maybe you could use that word to describe it, this green light comes out of the car. And even though it's outside, it kind of like seems like it's almost like it's engulfing my car, like it's reaching for my car, like it's reaching out. And then a car came in the oncoming traffic, so the car went back and ended up behind me again. That happened twice, and then it did it a third time, and at that point, a semi truck was coming in the opposing or the opposite traffic lane, and instead of going back, and again, I know it's as weird as it sounds, but this is what I remember, and this is what happened. I swear to it. It did not go back into the other lane behind me. It went through the semi truck, didn't collide with it or anything, and then disappeared. It didn't come back out on the other side. And then after that, I had this really, really, really just like feeling of impending doom, I guess you could say. And I just felt really on edge. And then my car radio, my Bluetooth, because I was using my phone to listen to Spotify and Pandora, it stopped working. And I was like, okay, well, I got a little bit more to go. I'm not going to do this whole drive with no music, and there's nothing on the radio because I'm in the middle of nowhere. So I did what you should never do on a dark road alone in the middle of the night. And I stopped my car on the side of the road, and I pulled the key out of the ignition, and I opened the door because that makes it turn off faster instead of just waiting. And I'm sitting there with my leg out the door, just kind of like sitting there looking at my phone, trying to fix it. Then all of a sudden I hear this pitter patter, and it gets heavier. It sounds like something's running. And I don't know what came over me, but I was like, in my head, I was just like, fuck. I pulled my leg back in, slammed the door shut. And as soon as the door closed, I heard this like loud, just thud, this bang sound, and the car shook. Something ran at my car and was, I guess, trying to get in. And after that, I got everything working again. And as I said, I had that feeling that something was with me, and I kept looking back in my rearview mirror, and it would seem like every time I would look in my rearview mirror, a figure would just duck out of sight. It's giving me goosebumps just thinking about it after that happened. And I would keep driving, and then it seemed like these songs that I was listening to now started to become relevant to the situation. Like, I can't remember the names of them, but songs started to play like about driving alone at night and things like that. And as more songs played, I felt the weight, I guess, get lighter and lighter and lighter. And then eventually this last song played. And at the time that it played, the feeling of, that sense of impending doom had gone away. It was a song that was talking about, it's okay, don't be afraid, I'm friendly, or something like that. I don't remember what it was. It's probably some Pink Floyd song, but and it played right as I made it to the city limits. I could see it in the horizon. I could see, the lights and stuff like that. And right before I hit that city, the feeling went away that someone was with me, but it wasn't like, evil anymore. It didn't feel evil. It just felt like there was something in the car with me, but not like it was malevolent. An owl seemed to appear from the front of my car and just flew away. And then it didn't feel like anything was with me.
You fucker. Yeah. Well, owls seem to be showing up at paranormal events.
Yeah. And the creepy
So
part.
I just want to find out if there's any more to the story before we analyze it.
I thought so. I told my mom about it because my mom is Native American, and she claims that it was that there was something that was trying to get me, but a benevolent spirit, maybe, I don't know, one of her ancestors or something like that, knew who I was and kept it at bay. But the strange part is that in most Native American myth, owls are actually harbingers of death. So
this is one of, if not the best ghost story I've ever heard, and pretty great to get that original story on the podcast for a conspiracy theory server. So thank you very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
So now I just want to hear, how have you processed this? I mean, what do you think happened? Why do you think it happened? How have you made peace with this story?
So I'm going to try to remember the name. I haven't thought about it in a while. I have to look it up in English first. But there's this East Asian myth, and this is what I attributed it to. And in English, it translates to ghosts that build walls, or ghosts that erect walls. And I think, I can't remember how to say it. I think it was like in Filipino or something. It was like Gaiga Ken or something like that. No, I just found it. It was Gida Kang. That's what they're called or something. I don't know if I pronounced it right. I'll type it out here in the thing real quick. And I learned about that and read about it and people's experiences with it. And it's what it sounds like is they will find, weary travelers, people that are tired or whatever, and they will bring you into their realm. And they will basically feast off of your energy, and they'll keep you there. You might get out, you might not get out. There's different ways that they say you have to get out. Like they say you'll wake up and you'll just feel like something's wrong if like you were asleep or something, because you won't be able to, they can't recreate things that they haven't seen. So for example, say you woke up and you felt just off. They say the first thing you should do is look outside, or just look in places that you don't really go much. Because say, for example, you opened a room in your house that you haven't opened in a long time, and there's nothing in there. Like it just led to nowhere. Kind of like you see those old movies where they go into like someone's memory, but they can't access it if they don't have memories of that place, sort of thing. So they would use your memories to trap you. But if they were not, I guess, watching you per se, whenever they trapped you, they wouldn't have access to those memories. They only have so much. And I would say the way that you get out of it is you have to realize it before they realize you're there fully, because they won't always, even you might just stumble into their territory. You might cross into a portal, and not know about it. And I think that's probably why I got out, if that is what it was, because I feel like it didn't realize I was there until toward the end. And by that time, whatever that other spirit was already, running defense on my behalf. But they say that you need to realize it before, and then you have to take all of your clothes off and you have to put them on backwards before it can get to you, because it confuses it. And then it won't know, who you are or down from up, and it'll eventually let you go. But if you don't do it in time, you'll eventually get trapped there, and it'll just feed on your fear and energy for basically the rest of time until you somehow get out. So That's what I attributed it to.
Amazing. I love how this podcast went from hardcore geopolitical military analysis to straight up spooky wooky supernatural shit. Awesome. So I think this has been a pretty awesome podcast. I want to very much thank Generalissimo for his experiences and stories, and Sir Praz for his analysis. I just want to open the floor to any questions for either of these two gentlemen from the audience, if there is any. Looks like everybody is speechless. So that being said, I think this is a pretty great place to wrap it up. Again, thank you to the special guests. Thank you to the recorders. Thank you to the live audience. Thank you to anybody listening to us on Podcast Addict, Podbean, YouTube, or any other platforms. Please do join the Discord server, The Roundtable, where you can find us in the conspiracy section of Discord. You can also find us on our website. I believe it's theroundtable.com. You can also check us out on all social media. Mr. Wolverine is not here, so that being said, please join us for the next episode, which will hopefully be on Freemasonry, and maybe we can get Mr. Generalissimo back in that one to pick his brain about a whole nother can of worms. But for now, thank you for joining us on the Roundtable Podcast. We'll see you next time.